Hello friends, myself Dr. Shailesh Koekar. I am welcoming you to Dnyanadeep Academy's daily answer writing program. I started this initiative in order to help the students who are preparing for the UPSC Civil Services to write good answers. Earlier we had discussed two important questions from the history, modern Indian history. Today we are going to discuss the two questions from the section of the world history. Okay, so let's move to first question. Today's first question. Okay, sure. Okay, what's first question? Okay, the first question is, okay, it was asked by UPSC in 2013 examination. The question is latecomer. Okay, consider latecomer industrial revolution in the Japan involved certain factors that were markedly different from what West had experienced. Okay, consider the question carefully. Latecomer industrial revolution in Japan involved certain factors that were markedly different from what West had experienced in 2013. This question was asked. So, what is expected to write this in this particular question? What you are expected to write in the answer? Okay, so what should be our points in the answer? What is industrial revolution? Okay, what do you understand by the term industrial revolution? What were the factors this for? In very brief, okay, do not go into details, but the question is all about the industrial revolution in Japan and its comparison with the Western industrial revolution, whether it was late or contemporary. That was the question. Okay, so industrial revolution, its meaning, factors and the significance in very brief. It's beginning in different countries because the question is about the comparison of the industrial revolution in Japan with respect to the other countries, other Western countries. So it's beginning in different countries and factors therein and as well as the process. Okay, then now we will come to the case of Japan. What had happened in the Japan, what conditions had prevailed in Japan prior to and during the process of the industrialization, and how they were different from these other countries, how they were different from each other, and why Japan was late. And therefore here we need to mention the process in the Japan as well. How industrialization took place in Japan, factors, process in brief, and then implications thereof. Okay, what are the implications of this particular process, and then finally we reach the conclusion. Okay, so these points should be incorporated into our answer. So let's discuss the answer now. I have made a particular draft to discuss with you. Let's discuss this particular draft. Okay, so introduction. I will introduce this particular question with these points. Industrial revolution refers to the changes in the processes of the production. Changes in the processes of production wherein human labor is replaced by machines operated by power, leading to the mass scale manufacturing of goods. Generally we use this expression, agrarian economy is moving to the economy based on the manufacturing. This is generally how we define the industrial revolution. But in this process of manufacturing based economy, there is important role of the machines operated by the power, and therefore I incorporate this particular point that it is a process of production wherein human labor is replaced by the machines operated by the power, and thereby leading to the mass scale manufacturing of the goods. In the sphere of industrialization, the revolutionary fervor was first evident in the Britain, followed by other countries like Germany, USA, because we need to mention the countries in the West where it had begun and how it had proceeded. In the sphere of industrialization, the revolutionary fervor was first evident in the Britain, followed by other countries like Germany, USA, etc. The process in these countries was mainly guided by the ideology of the laissez-faire, that advocated the least government role in the economic systems. So we need to mention the factors as well, because we need to bring out the difference between the Japanese industrialization and the Western industrialization. And therefore, here the expression laissez-faire is important. Do consider this particular point. Okay, chalo. Okay, now consider the next point. Now come to the body part. Japan is considered as a latecomer. Japan is considered as a latecomer in the process of industrialization. Till the mid of the 19th century, it was an isolated country. Japan was an isolated country, and such an isolation was deliberately preferred by the Japanese rulers, who tried very hard to keep Japanese system uninfluenced by the Western one. So Japan represented the case of a closed country wherein no Westerner was allowed to enter into the Japan, and no Japanese was allowed to go into the West. Okay, therefore the Japanese rulers, they deliberately had preferred this particular isolation, and therefore Japan was uninfluenced by the Western ideas and the developments that took place in the West. Okay, that was the reason why Japan was latecomer. However, towards the mid of the 19th century, Japanese were inspired by the progress achieved by the Westerners in the industrial spheres. Okay, there is this particular story that towards the mid of the 19th century, okay, one American fleet, it entered into the Japanese shore, and Japanese were amazed by the achievements of the Westerners, okay, to what extent they had progressed. And therefore, Japanese people, they also had decided to carry out the similar path. Okay, so towards the mid of the 19th century, the Japanese were inspired by the progress achieved by the Westerners in the industrial spheres. This led to the Treaty of Kanagawa. Which opened Japanese ports for external trade. Okay, so now Japan was turning to be a liberal economy, but these elements of liberalism were not accepted to certain conservative elements in the Japan, and therefore they rose into the rebellion. And that rebellion eventually is known as the Meiji Revolution. These liberal forces eventuated into the Meiji Revolution in 1867, which provided impetus to the modern industrialization based upon the development of heavy and basic industries. So when conservative forces rose into the rebellion, that rebellion was suppressed, and eventually a liberal regime known as the Meiji regime was established. And this Meiji regime, it provided impetus to the modern industrialization based on the development of heavy and basic industries. And here comes the problem. What is that problem? Okay, consider this particular point. However, owing to the huge capital requirement, heavy and basic industries require huge capital. Okay, owing to the huge capital requirement and the long gestation period, no private capital could be brought in, because heavy and basic industries, okay, the gestation period is more. So long gestation period, no private individual capital could be brought in. So private individuals, they did not come forward to invest in such huge enterprises. Okay, therefore Japanese rulers came forward and became prime investor. This is where Japan, okay, stands different, because okay, the question is, okay, how Japanese industrialization was different than the industrialization in the Western country. In case of Western country, okay, the policy was laissez-faire, because okay, the least government interference. But in case of Japan, it was the role of the government that proceeded, that led to the industrialization, okay, in its next phases. Consider this particular argument. So therefore Japanese rulers came forward and became prime investor. As industrialization progressed, many industries were eventually sold to the private players at subsidized rate. But the thing is, eventually as industrialization it got developed, the state, okay, tried to reduce its role by selling out those industrial units to the private players at subsidized rate. But what had happened? But as majority of the Japanese private capital was invested in the banking sector, Japan witnessed a transformation of banking capital into industrial capital in the initial phase itself. Okay, this is how the Japanese industrialization is again different than the Western industrialization, because in Western countries, okay, this particular process was witnessed much later, okay, in the latter phases of the industrialization. But in case of Japan, in the first phase of the industrialization itself, the banking capital was transformed into the industrial capital. So this is the first difference, this is the second difference. Also, due to the role played by the state, okay, as the state was playing the role, due to the role played by the state, Japan could not witness the emergence of the middle class that could check the powerful monarchical forces as was witnessed in the European countries. European countries, or say Western countries. In Western countries, that industrialization, which was based on the private capital laissez-faire principle, that resulted into the strengthening of the middle classes. But in case of Japan, okay, as state had played the role, there was no strong middle class, and therefore imperial forces could not be checked upon. Monarchical forces could not be checked upon, which eventuated into the aggressive stance taken by those rulers, which okay, resulted in the important role played by Japan in First and Second World War. Okay, so where economic liberalism led rise to such forces, means in European countries, economic liberalism led rise to the middle classes, but in case of Japan, that could not happen. Okay. Now, next part, conclusion. Conclusion is, thus, Japan represented the unique case. Thus, Japan represented the unique case of industrialization, wherein factors as well as processes of industrialization was different than what West had experienced. Are you getting the point? So here, what we have tried to do here, we tried to establish how Japanese industrialization was different than the Western industrialization in the matter of its process, beginning of the process, as well as the factors responsible for the Western industrialization and Japanese industrialization, and thus we tried to show how Japanese industrialization had represented a unique case. Okay, yes. Now we shall move to the next question. Okay, next question. The next question is, this was also asked by the UPSC. The question is, Africa was chopped into the states artificially created by accident of the European competition. Analyze. Africa was chopped into the states artificially created by the accident of the European competition. Means Africa was divided into multiple segments, and that division was not natural, and that division was not owing to the participation of the African people in that process. Rather, that division was a result of the European competition. So Africa was chopped into the states. It was a kind of forceful, chopped. Africa was chopped into the states artificially created by the accident of European competition. Analyze. So this question is about the imperialism. The question is about imperialism. So we need to explain in very brief what is imperialism, then what is modern imperialism, it's spread in different parts of the world, and what was the case of Africa, and how African case represented a different example or kind of unique example. What was the situation till mid of the 19th century in Africa, what changed thereafter, that is after the mid of the 19th century, what had changed in Africa, and how European nations, they started taking interests into the African land, and how they competed against each other, and how these competitions were resolved, and that resolution led to the chopping of the Africa into the different small states, and what was its effect, its implications. This would be the points that should be incorporated into our answer. Now let's discuss the draft of this particular answer. Chalo. So consider these arguments. First, let's have map. Here you will find Africa in 1880. In the beginning, what would you find? Very limited portions of the Africa were colonized by the European people, especially those on the coastline, and limited regions, they were colonized by the European people. But eventually, in the first quarter of the 20th century, almost entire of the Africa was distributed or colonized by the European countries, and in this process they distributed these states among themselves by way of treaties and agreements, without consulting the wishes of the African people, and that is basically the core of this particular question. Chalo. See. Introduction. Imperialism is a process of establishing dominance by a country over the political and economic life of the people outside its pale. Pale of that particular country, that beyond range. Imperialism is a process of establishing dominance by a country over the political and economic life of the people outside its pale. Now, modern imperialism, because imperialism, it was prevalent in the ancient period as well, it was prevalent in the medieval phases as well, and now it is the modern imperialism. Modern imperialism that was led by the European countries such as Spain, Portugal, Britain, France, etc. began during 17th century, and its focus was upon setting up the colonies in different parts of the world. Initially, they tried to establish the colonies in the American and Latin American countries, but eventually America and Latin America witnessed the process of decolonization, and thereafter new colonies or new areas were attempted to be colonized by these Western countries, European countries. So in different parts of the world. However, in the first phase, penetration into Africa and Asia was limited because penetration was more into America and Latin America. But eventually America and parts of the Latin America were decolonized. In fact, it is said that till the mid of the 19th century, 90% of the Africa was unknown to the Europeans. In this sense, Africa represented the case of dark continent. Okay, and this particular argument makes this question very, very important. Why? Because till mid of the 19th century, the Europeans were not much aware of the African continent, and suddenly within a very short span of time, Africa was colonized by these people. That is accident of the European competition. Okay, accident of the European competition that we need to explain here, establish here. Okay, sure. Okay, now this is the introduction. Now we move to the body part. Okay, however, during the second half of the 19th century, the situation underwent significant changes, and within a short span, almost entire Africa was colonized. Adventurous activities of some individuals like David Livingstone triggered the European ambition to extend influence in this part of the world. Okay, here you may not remember the name, so you can simply write adventurous activities of some individuals. You can write this way as well if you do not remember the name. Okay, but I knew the name and therefore I wrote it. Okay, adventurous activities of some individuals like David Livingstone triggered the European ambition to extend influence in this part of the world. The lead in this regard was taken by the Belgium, resulting into its control over the Congo. This inspired other European countries like Britain, France, Germany, etc. to join the race, and there began what is known as the scramble for Africa. Okay, everybody was kind of falling onto one another in order to take its chunk, in order to claim its share of the African continent. And this particular phenomenon is known as the scramble of the Africa, scramble for the Africa, scramble for Africa. Okay, race for the Africa. Okay, the European rivalry that developed out of this competition called for a resolution. So they thought that a resolution is necessary. Fighting has no significance or no outcome, and therefore they decided to come together. So European rivalry that developed out of this competition called for resolution, and outcome was Berlin Conference in 1884-85 that resulted in the evolution of a common code of conduct for the European nations to extend their control over different parts of Africa. Now they came together and they themselves had decided that they would distribute the spoils, they would distribute the parts of Africa amongst themselves. Okay, yes, while establishing their authority, these nations generally followed the policy of settling disputes on the table, not in the battlefield. Okay, so generally they would sit, they would discuss the matter, they would arrive at consensus, and they would resolve the dispute and distribute the African regions among themselves. Generally, by this way, African colonization was accomplished within a short span of 25 to 30 years, and that is why the word race, the word competition is used. While doing so, these powers showed no concern to the welfare of the African people and neglected their socio-cultural practices, political interests, etc. Okay? Yes. Now conclusion, and therefore it is stated that African colonization was a deliberate scheme on the part of European states to occupy the continent and divide the spoils. Okay, this is how we are supporting this particular statement. The statement was Africa was chopped into the states artificially created by accident of the European competition. Right? Okay, so these are the two questions from the world history that we had discussed. Okay, in this question, attempt is made to make you aware of how to write an answer. Okay, what is the structure of the answer? What there should be the introduction? What should be the conclusion? Okay, what point should be included in the body part? Okay, how to maintain the flow of the ideas, content and concept, and flow of that idea, and how to handle the different issues associated with that particular different dimensions associated with the issue under the scanner. Okay, hopefully this session would definitely be useful for you. Thank you very much for attending this session. I wish best of luck for your studies. Thank you very much. Bye.